Welcome to the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Green, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm sitting here today with Dr. Brian Tierney, and he is known as the Somatic Doctor, at least his professional, his website is Somatic Doctor, and his Instagram work as well. And I'm in Boulder, Colorado, as always, and Dr. Tierney is in somewhere in the Bay Area, San Francisco, joining us. And just a quick introduction, and then we'll jump in. But and is it okay if I call you Brian?
For sure.
On the show? Great. So Brian is a integrative therapy somatic psychotherapist and educator. He has a doctorate in somatic psychotherapy. He both has a private practice doing that work, as well as teaches at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, teaching this work. Let's see, I'm going to read something from his official intro. He is an eclectic psychotherapist who uses a combination of talk therapy and education with individuals, families, couples, children, and groups. He's also a seasoned dancer with over 20 years of experience in modalities such as contact improv, capoeira, and authentic music. And I know also Brian has a background in structural integration bodywork and other bodywork modalities. And one of my key interests, Brian, in having you on the show is this theme of multimodality, and what leaps out from your content online and your website and your background is that over the last 25 years or so, you've been sort of navigating multiple angles of therapeutically studying the human person, for everything from body work and trauma resolution models, dance and movement. And in a way, that's really the theme of this podcast overall, is how do sort of embodiment practices in general coincide around supporting human development. So I'm hoping that's kind of the conversation we can have today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about interdisciplinary stuff and multimodality stuff because, there's the big trend and the big movement, of course, is to specialization, almost to a ridiculous point, right? Where sometimes I make the joke that you can only refer somebody if they have exactly the same history or something like that, and it becomes almost ridiculous how much specialization there is. And I just love interdisciplinary practice and research.
Wonderful. Well, could we start with, I like to kind of do origin story, like if you kind of, how did you get on this path of study in the first place?
Yeah, so I grew up in Minnesota, and then which was
me too.
Oh, really?
Minneapolis.
No kidding. Yeah, I'm from St. Paul.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
there
cool.
You go. Cross the river.
So not only the same color scheme this morning, a similar origin.
It must be our Minnesotan heritage.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I like to say that Minnesota is a great place to grow up and a great place to leave.
Yeah.
Good people.
Yeah.
So I grew up there, and not much somatic awareness there besides clunking around our heads playing football and everything like that. When I went to university in Wisconsin, I was a party guy, and it just wasn't working for me. And the reason why I knew it wasn't working for me, like my career path was marketing, and I was in business school, and things just weren't lining up for me psychologically and with my friend group. And how it showed up for me is in my body. I just got anxious, and the symptoms showed up in my body, in my throat in particular. And then it was if we want to go with the throat, and what the throat often means symbolically is then that catapulted me into 15 years of finding my voice. And the first modality I went to, I think, was like Reiki or something like that. And then it was then I enrolled in acupuncture school. I moved out to California,
Okay.
lived at an integrative healing arts school for 3 years, which is where things really took off for me from this integrative
Right.
health standpoint. I lived with a bunch of like traveling teachers, had all these different experiences with different modalities, different teachers, from like
Cool.
polarity therapy.
What was the name of that?
It was called
What was the
Heartwood
name of that?
Institute. They used
Okay.
to. It
Okay.
was like one of the only residential massage schools in the world, where
Right.
you went to the mountains and people lived there for an entire year, and were just immersed in
Right.
it. Like all organic food, totally off the
Yeah.
grid. Straw Bale
Yeah.
Temple, and just this great. And it was founded by this wonderful man who teaches polarity therapy. You familiar with polarity?
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I am.
that's in my toolbox, polarity therapy,
Cool.
craniosacral therapy, massage. That was kind of the origins for me. And then that catapulted
I
me
see.
into a long career doing craniosacral work, which I still do to this day. And then, there's men's
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
thrown in there, all this stuff, right? But it was really Heartwood Institute that was the
Yeah.
hub for my
Okay.
integrative study and practice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. So it sounds like, if I'm understanding correctly, kind of the beginning professional work was in sort of hands-on body work, acupuncture, craniosacral therapy, et cetera, and which you're still carrying with you through today. But then your interest in psychology must have been enough to propel you through graduate studies and kind of going down that path as well. Do you kind of can you speak to just a little bit of what kept pushing you forward in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, at Heartwood, I was a yoga teacher. I started to get into dance, and there's all these
Yeah.
different folks that, when they were doing body work, they were engaged in processes that, really got the emotions going. And I was super
Okay.
repressed. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest, and
In
had
Minnesota, yeah, we're not known for our emotional
exactly. I was
expressiveness.
super
Yeah. Yeah.
repressed. So gradually I started to
Yeah.
receive body work that started to get the
Okay.
plumbing going. And I started to
Yeah.
then express more on the dance floor. And I really just started to open up. I went to men's groups and all that stuff. And then a picture started to
Mm.
emerge about, hey, it's not just about the body. It's not just about the mind and emotions. It's an integrated whole. And,
Yeah.
and I think, it was really, probably the men's work, doing kind of like somatic work with men, doing men's
Hmm.
work that really got me thinking about archetypal psychology. So archetypal psychology was kind of my passion, my way into the deep study of psychology. And then neurology was there with craniosacral therapy. So, and then gradually
Right.
over time, my passion for neurology and archetypal psychology started to converge,
I
especially
see.
in the men's
Yeah.
work and the craniosacral work and the trauma resolution stuff. That all kind of put me
Yeah.
in the pipeline to do my doctoral studies. Yeah.
Got it. Cool. If somebody was listening and they thought, well, I can't totally picture what somatic men's work would be like. I mean, I have my own experience with it, but I'm just thinking about listeners who may wonder what that is. Could you just sort of speak a little bit to the kinds of, what I guess maybe what impacted you, what kinds of practices, just to give just a little flavor of what that environment is like.
Yeah, I like to just keep it simple and call it like a specialized type of plumbing. I mean, it speaks to men,
Okay.
right? Because,
Right.
I was repressed and stuck in my emotional body and in my physical body. I was really limited in my range of expression. And
Right.
guys that are trained facilitators in the men's work, which I later came to be, just have a way of reading
Right.
bodies, like a kind of like a Rolf method of kind of assessing bodies, but more from a kind of emotional plumbing standpoint.
psycho-emotional, what's kind of being repressed, that sort of
Yeah, and
thing.
like the two biggies, of course, are
Yeah,
grief and rage, and guys just have a way of reading where the body is clogged,
yeah,
and it's hard to explain unless you experience it yourself, and you've experienced it yourself, so you know what I'm talking about. But
right,
for
right.
newbies, it's I like to just keep it simple and say it's plumbing. Like let's get things moving. Let's
Right.
get the vitality
Yeah,
flowing.
kind of
Yeah.
freeing up the emotional, but maybe even sort of yeah, emotional plumbing makes sense to me. But also, I guess I think a little bit like almost almost like from a Reichian perspective, sort of like freeing the bioenergies and whatnot as
Yeah, and
well.
then that can look like getting the body moving, doing breath work,
Yeah.
touch. Sometimes
Yep.
it's reading poetry and things like that get men out of the linguistic or into different linguistic centers of the brain and so on, so that they think different and can feel differently. Yeah.
Yeah. Super cool. For you, was a lot of that in kind of like into like retreat formats, sort of like multi-day intensive kind of
Yeah, it was the
environments?
Mankind Project. I was involved with the
Yeah,
Mankind
sure.
Project for about 8-10 years or something like that when I lived in New Zealand. Um,
I
and so
see.
I trained as a facilitator in that, and then it was then that I really started to, because archetypal psychology is very much circulating in that community, right? So uh, this
Right.
idea that there could be archetypal energies really fascinated me, made intuitive sense to me, and that
Right.
carried me into deep studies in psychology.
So, this is again, I'm reading from your website, but what's quoted there is that your doctoral project was an integrative approach to psychology that wove together somatic psychology, sociology, anthropology, embryology, neurobiology, mythical studies, and general systems theory. Which as a person who likes to look at how things intersect, I was like, yeah, cool. I want to read your thesis and your dissertation. Um, could anything you could you share just a little bit about we would need way more time than our hour to go into just that piece, but can you talk a little bit about what that study was?
Yeah, well, my original inspiration was to I was really curious about what we see in somatics is almost kind of like a continuum and sometimes split groups, where
Right.
we have kind of like a catharsis oriented group that's very much about letting
Right.
it rip and finding the emotions and just roaring and screaming and you know
Primal
primal scream
scream
stuff.
and yep,
And
yep, yep,
the Mankind Project was very much in that camp, kind of drama
yep,
therapy, cathartic work,
yeah,
versus
yeah,
modalities that are more containment focused. And
yep,
that's often having to do with this neurobiological frame of trauma resolution, taking it slow. Um,
right. Slower is faster,
that
all
whole
that
thing,
stuff.
craniosacral work
Yeah,
and SEP, and just
yeah.
working on granular sequencing. And
Titration, all of
yeah,
that.
and I
Yeah,
began to see,
yeah.
as a craniosacral teacher and teaching
Mm.
trauma resolution from that perspective, that there was like a anti-catharsis movement.
Totally,
Yep.
100%.
And then
Yep,
not only that,
yep.
an anti-intellectual movement that was there in the somatics community. And that turned me
Okay,
off. So
sure.
I wanted to, because I was really powerfully moved by drama therapies. They were
Yeah,
very, very meaningful to me. Being a repressed
yeah,
Minnesotan, right? I
yeah,
needed
yeah.
to learn how to get grounded. I needed to learn how to contain myself and go slow and work with my own trauma and so on. But for me, it was
Right.
essential that I could learn how to just let the life force move through me and to be expressive in that way. So that what inspired the dissertation was like how to bring these two together in a kind of more integrated theory.
Nice.
And it's not easy to do because it's a pretty wide continuum, right? So there's a lot there, especially when you bring in the archetypes. And so the idea is like, I wanted to bring in archetypal theory. Okay.
Right.
Because, the idea with archetypes is that they're themes that cut across cultures, that really grab us
in mythology.
Yeah.
Could you name just a few of the, just give us 3 or 4 of some of the common archetypes that, that just so we can relate, warrior.
Let's start with the warrior, right? So the warrior is our aggressive systems, right? Whereas mammals, we just have that. We have aggression circuitry. And we either do aggression well or we don't do aggression well. But again, so like aggression is a word, right? And there's all these words in psychodynamic theory and all these words in neurobiology. And I had those frameworks and they're interesting to me. But what's most compelling to the human imagination is story. And that's where the archetypes show up. They show up in stories. They show up in myths. They show up in dreams. They show up in psychotic process. So it was really compelling to me to have that archetypal image of the warrior. And not only have that archetypal image of the warrior, but to understand that is a system. It's a psycho-neurobiological system, okay, that has cultural ramifications and has impacted culture, influenced culturally, shaped culturally, is in a reciprocal tension relationship with an opposing system, okay, called the lover. Okay, and the lovers are attachment systems. So, like attachment, neurobiology, for example. Again, lots of words, but then we have this timeless image.
The feeling
and the narrative is what's compelling to the mind, right? That's what our brains do. Our brains socially engage in narrative. Our bodies socially engage in narrative. We are narrative organisms.
Definitely.
So then I got really interested in the tension between the opposites, right? And then that's what that my passion was, to kind of understand and map out, okay, if there's systems how do the systems in the psyche, the tension systems in the psyche, how does that map onto the body? How does that map onto family dynamics and social dynamics? Okay. And how might that be an expression of certain fundamental tensions in biology, namely how the body constructs itself in a tension field embryologically? Okay. And then so that, and that passion came from the field of study called biodynamic craniosacral therapy, which is very interested in embryology.
In embryological development. Cool.
So it's like, there's so much there and so much to talk about, but I guess to simplify it, right, is that we are a distributed tension grid, and that's where the fascial research comes in there too. So the psyche is like that. It's a distributed tension grid, and it either distributes the tensions well or not well. You know what I mean? Society is a distributed tension grid, and it either distributes that tension well or not well, usually not well.
Harmoniously or
usually not well. And so is the embryo, and so is the universe, right?
I see. So is this where this is? So I was kind of wondering, where does the general systems theory come in? And I think I might be hearing it right now, that any system seems to be organized along these principles.
And that you can probably gather that that Ida Rolf is in there, right? That idea that there's a structural integration that can occur over time when we're working directly with the distributed tension system.
The tension system of the myofascial system. Yeah. Super. I want to just, I guess, cheerlead something for a moment, if it's okay. Because I love the, that central theme you presented of how do you reconcile the value of these more expressive and dynamic and cathartic models with sort of some of this neurobiology and that's sort of more focused trauma resolution models that are focused on titration and I just wanted to share that's a big interest of mine too, and it's something that I've sort of wrestled with. Part of my own journey around exploring multimodally has been because I want to have the good of one thing, but not exclude the good of something else. And like, but in some of my early days, it's like, my most early body work training was, or body oriented training was in the martial arts. And so for me, that was kind of my, I kind of got thrown into I didn't have much of a warrior archetype, but then I got thrown into Japanese kendo fencing, and I quickly realized I better get my neurobiology in order to support aggression, or else I was going to be toast. And so for me, I had some big experiences like that, and then my most early therapeutic work was a form of structural integration body work. And it was in a particular lineage that was pretty cathartic. It was fairly strong work, pretty emotive, pretty expressive. And then when I got interested in the neurobiology side and I kind of gravitated towards somatic experiencing and things like that, that's when I really sort of saw that there was now this tension within the somatic world where, people were talking about, oh, well, you're an old school Rolfer, but, I'm a new school Rolfer where we, we don't, so you kind of hear these things. And I thought to myself, this is a false dichotomy because there's definitely value in slowing down and working with what the system can accommodate, especially when we get around trauma. So sensitivity is like, huge. But let's not forget that we're human beings in dynamic experiences, and sometimes those express in big energies. So how do we kind of hold both? So I just wanted to quickly say that I love the theme that you explored there. So that's my piece.
Yeah. I'm really interested in the tingle response, Alex. The tingle,
okay.
like the goosebump response.
Totally.
And I just had one after you. It was the first one of our interview today where I just had a whole tingle response. Involuntary piloerection is the term. It just sounds so good, doesn't it?
I love that. Wait, involuntary piloerection?
The little muscles,
nice.
pylori, or I can't remember the pilo muscles on the, they're tiny little muscles on the pores, right? But it's really interesting. And the psychological literature shows that people that are high in openness tend to have the tingle response more. So maybe that's a pitch for my openness. Maybe I'm being slightly arrogant or something. I don't know. But anyways, I just wanted to share that science, share that somatic moment, share the joy, because there's bliss that goes in that tingle response for me. It tells me that we're on the same channel. Or there's a resonance here, and it feels good to me. So I just wanted to name that.
Oh, thank you.
Just wanted to name that. Yeah. And because it matters a lot, this tension, right? And that it what I like to say is that identity can be a gluey thing. Because to me, what can happen is that you have, pockets of research and practice. Okay. Let's take, for example, the interpersonal neurobiology milieu of
Dan
research. Dan Siegel. It's kind of neo-Buddhism. It's mindfulness based. It's intersubjectivity based. It's kind of like, let's focus on essentially slowing down. Okay. And there's identity-based factors where people identify and of course it stuff like this takes us on a journey. It opens us up. It's meaningful. It puts us in touch with the big meaningful flow of life. And so obviously we would become identified with these things. Like
Right.
things that are very meaningful to us they just become almost like the central organizing principle of our life. And that's good until it's not good. You know what I mean? I think that's one of the things that, or the primary thing that's at play here, that I write quite a bit about in my book that I'm conjuring up. And so you got, like, for example, the slow approach to trauma resolution, which is informed by the neurobiology of trauma, informed by an interlocks with the interpersonal neurobiology community. And then it shows up in clinical practice as a very specific pacing, a very specific tempo. That is slow and coherent. But then there's some element of identity that comes in where this community, under the umbrella and under the kind of aegis of self-regulation, because that's like the mantra, right?
That's the mantra. Yeah, self-regulation.
Self-regulation.
For sure.
The biology lines up with it. There's in terms of the attachment biology. But, there doesn't seem to be much room for dynamism in terms of the intellect, because the intellect moves, right? It can move at a speed that is a differential tempo. And also the sorts of aggressive potencies that are there in the martial arts, which are creative art, they can get scapegoated. And then also that this side of the river, the self-regulation side of the river, can look at the other side of the river, the methodologies that are, more cathartic and more dynamic, and then just start to, and this is filtered through the identity filter, right? That's not us. You're not one of us, right? And then over on that side of the river, that's the bad stuff that's re-traumatizing.
Yeah, you guys are re-traumatizing people.
Or over-intellectual, or disembodied, or addicts, or something like that. And it's just, you know what I mean? It's ridiculous, because there's good stuff on both sides, but this slow stuff is, it's radically important clinically with traumatized people. Of course, yes. But like sometimes I go to a workshop and it's like, it becomes a huge transgression to actually move with dynamism.
To do anything beyond that. Yeah. Well, totally. So like one way to think about it is like, like one of the main important axioms of the neurobiological work is safety, right? What is, cultivating a sense of safety for the nervous system that helps, shift away from defensive physiology. So that's, in some ways, that's the key ingredient of trauma resolution models, is how to restore a felt sense of safety, a neuroception of safety that can then create that shift. But and like absolutely, for in the domain of the delicacy of trauma resolution, what a beautiful thing to attune to. But do we live our lives pure with does that mean we can somehow cultivate that there's safety in all moments? No, we're in human environments, competitive environments, sometimes antagonistic environments. And what do we do then? So again, I'm just sort of resonating with what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah. And I don't think it's going to be very safe for our young daughters, for example, if we're constantly trying to slow them down and impose upon their nervous systems our concept of what safety means. You know what I mean? It's like Yeah, well, you need to slow down so that you can feel safe, my little 4-year-old. I mean, no.
Right.
I mean,
No,
it's
be
like, be
you.
you,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
let's do this thing. Let's play. Let's be dynamic, And that's why I like to
Right.
say, the little thing that I like to say with somatic students is it's not just regulate or self-regulate, it's rave and regulate or rock and roll and regulate. The sympathetic system itself gets scapegoated by this, by this. You know what I
Totally.
mean? It's like as if just.
I do know what
Yeah.
you mean. As if mobilizing energy is a bad thing.
It's
Yeah.
like, like what?
Yeah. Well, I always say I don't use the term fight or flight nervous system because it makes it sound bad. Or at least that's, so so I'm totally with you. We'd be pretty boring, leading pretty boring lives if we didn't have any sympathetic tone to add to the mix.
Exactly. Yeah. Playfulness, I think that's a big one, right? And I think that's one of the big ones in the trauma resolution community is that it has this, given the gravity of the work, it's understandable that this happens, but there can be a sliding into just like a humorlessness, and a lack of regard for how important play is. And play is a sympathetic system thing, right? I mean, right. Sure, we could find out a way to play in a parasympathetic way. It can be done. It is done. Right, but like play necessitates dynamism and variability and,
Yeah. So, surprise and
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Super cool. Wow. So so my mind is going two places at once, but one is, well, I'll just share a comment I frequently make around this whole topic of multimodalism. My word, the word I tend to use, or interdisciplinary or whatever. But like, I now have a little bit of a sort of a litmus test when, I have explored a lot of things, everything from structural integration to Feldenkrais method to, SC, the things that I mentioned to you earlier. And as soon as a teacher starts framing things starts othering other modalities and saying, we have to look at it from a functional movement perspective and everything else is downstream of that. Or we have to look at it from, integration in the field of gravity. As soon as somebody makes a claim that there's sort of some primacy there. Now, I mean, you do need to articulate the philosophy of your modality, but as soon as people start bad mouthing the efficacy of other things is when my attention starts to drop, because my own experience is that these various modalities, from dance to martial arts to different trauma models to all kinds of things, bodywork, they wouldn't perpetuate if they weren't providing some significant value to some of the people. Now, no one might not be the whole story, but anyway, it's just a little bit of a kind of a soapbox thing for me, is that I hate it when there's this attitude of my thing is the best and I'm just going to start to dismiss these other things. So I don't know, if for you, who's been very eclectic, I wonder if you've seen that, if you sense that.
Yeah. You gave me another Pilo erection, Alex. So yeah, and because we're in this this field, this multimodal field that is, I think that it makes us partners in thought and practice in that way, right? So when I found somebody that's tuned into that channel, it makes my body thrilled and excited. Because for sure. I mean, when I was in, I taught in the biodynamic craniosacral community for quite some time. And there's very much this thing in the community, which is one of the things that really turned me off. And it's so prevalent that I ended up kind of doing the thing myself and noticing as I was doing it. I was noticing as I was doing it, like, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. I'm
doing that thing.
right? Yeah. And the primary tension, or one of the big tensions, because this is a very slow community, it's kind of like their biodynamics is very proud about being neutral. And so the other modality, specifically usually biomechanical craniosacral work, upledger style.
Yeah.
Those folks who then get othered, okay, they are not neutral. They are not the way. Okay, they are not the way. And, as somebody that was very, very touched in the early days by a kind of shamanic-based upledger person, it was always in the background, even as I found myself kind of doing the narrative a bit. It didn't line up. And I knew I wasn't being inauthentic. I knew I was doing that othering thing. And this is where actually my studies in psychology really helped a bit, specifically Jungian studies, because the Jungians are super fierce about grandiosity. That is like the Jungian approach, I could say could be generalized and narrowed to the study basically of how humans have this horrible habit of being grandiose.
Okay, interesting.
That's one way of understanding the whole Jungian apparatus, is that it's deeply attuned to how we do grandiosity. And so that really helped me to understand, okay, there's grandiosity in this community and it's organized in this way. And there's grandiosity in this community and it's organized in this way. And that is not creating structural integration between the communities. It's not creating that tensegrity system where there's actual crosstalk and interdisciplinary research and practice like there should be. And that's what the body does, right? It distributes tensions. Like, we should learn from the body because it does it. It does it better than how we do society and identity, right?
Yeah. Beautiful. Oh, I'm going to do a big sigh of relief hearing somebody else put it much more beautiful and sophisticated language to something that I've been thinking a lot about. So very cool to hear all of this. I wonder if we could pivot a little bit. There's a bunch of parts of your story that are really interesting. Like, for a part of me isn't like, I want to hear about your dance and all of that. But I think what's more pressing is, could you talk a little bit about your clinical practice these days? Because I'm trying to imagine for myself. So I'm wanting to work with you. Am I doing touch modalities? Am I doing talk modalities? Am I doing all of those things? Is all my work in person with you? I'm just really curious about how you're practicing, if you're willing to share.
Yeah. So I would say 40 to 60% in-person work. And there's most definitely a talk therapy, meaning-making component. There's a percentage of my client base that wants more of that, and a percentage of my client base that wants less of that. So, it's being an interdisciplinary, multimodal guy, I'm still going to be on some level following what a person's imperatives are. So if they're, for example, if they're really interested in doing work with the imagination and they want to make meaning, and that is what floats their boat, and they find a lot of healing in that angle, then we'll go there. But one of the things that does cut across my work, no matter what the approach is, whether it's a lot of talking or it's mainly kind of tracking body sensations and doing, for example, traumatic memory work, is folks are generally on my table. Okay. And I'm generally doing it, touching them. And I'm generally using still, even despite the critical appreciation that we've shared about the slow stuff, I'm generally doing things quite slow. You know, in terms of it's a craniosacral touch. So I'm just essentially touching the autonomic nerve plexi
system. Yeah.
And then just tracking with them sensation, but also basically kind of doing talk therapy with touch. That's one kind of approach. And then another approach is I'm doing my own unique approach to trauma resolution. A lot of people, of course, come in because somatics, the buzzword is glued together kind of with trauma, right? So that I would say that most people come in through my website having researched trauma. And then so they'll come in for the trauma resolution work, and that's a distinctive operating mode, treatment mode. But how it's similar is that the person is still on my table. They're still kind of relaxed. I'm still touching their autonomic plexi, and but their eyes are closed. Like for example, I use EMDR tappers with people on the table. I put
is that those?
I actually put them on people's ankles. I find that it's less intrusive to have the tappers be on the ankles. But I do the work with the eyes closed, so I kind of have my own unique approach to EMDR that involves touch and kind of my own style of regression work. So there's that, and then I do also breath work, this is where the dynamic element comes in, where I get people just, doing intense breathing and kind of getting the vitality going, and we're breathing hard, and we're getting the affect flowing. And then I also do kind of like a drama therapy approach, which is kind of like a projected internal family system approach that's informed by my
with chair work and stuff like that.
The person's up in gravity, and I get them to, I support them expressing and moving their body and acting things out,
speaking.
So I would say that those are the main pillars right there. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I do bring in some of the deeper connective tissue work. Not a whole heck of a lot, but I bring that stuff in there.
Yeah.
I like rolfing faces still. I think faces are really where the rubber hits the road in terms of our identity complexes. So I like to still, I do like to work on faces from a connective tissue perspective, because I think the face is really where psyche and social dynamics meet.
Meet. Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Interesting. Super cool. What percentage of your work is so I know your private practice is a big piece, and in a minute here I want to ask about your writing project, but on the teaching side, is that tell me just a little bit about what the education you're doing for other therapists.
Yeah, so I teach in the somatics program at CIIS, and I teach neuroscience, which has been a passion of mine since I started to, since craniosacral, right? So that's been 25 years. I've been studying the brain and the nervous system for 25 years now, quite deeply. And so it really afforded me, in creating that curriculum, I could really dive deeply into things that I love, like for example, the evolution of the neuron. I just love to nerd out on stuff like that. Like just like the research problem is, how did the neuron evolve? And then I'm in the literature I'm still in the literature of how the neuron evolved after probably 15 years of asking that question. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
So I love to nerd out on that stuff, and in the background, and I'm an interdisciplinary researcher, right? So I'll go from molecular biology to embryology to sociology, and then back to archaeology, for example. And and you can see that my practice of research is very much like what we've been talking about. It's all connected, right? So it's just like a node in the network that I'm picking up. And I'm already assuming that node in the network is connected. I just need to figure out and find connector points and use my imagination and my research mind to make the connection. So I bring that to the students, and I've been, really interested in the default mode network, for example. We talk a lot about the default mode network in the class. Talk a lot about interpersonal neuro. All the classic stuff with kind of a flair for what I like to call re-enchanting science. That's what I love to do, because it's like there's something about science that can be there's something about science that can be grandiose. You know what I mean? Because even in, like, for example, polyvagal theory is a great example of how grandiose science can get. Like, I love Porges's work. I was a joiner for a long time with that stuff. I was like, polyvagal, I'm going to teach this stuff. I know this stuff. Like, great. But then the more and more that I researched the nervous system, the more and more I realized this is just a model, and we know so little.
It's the beginning of a story, but there's what I like about Porges is that it's funny you mentioned that, because I was just going to bring up polyvagal theory and sort of ask you about that, because what I was going to say is, I'm pretty steeped in those communities through SC, which is pretty, we use the polyvagal theory. I do TRE, the tension and trauma. We use polyvagal theory as our model. I do the safe and sound listening protocol. That's Porges's thing. So these are all sort of polyvagal specific kind of interventions. But I was going to ask you that exact question, which is now, the few times that I've heard him speak, I actually do detect humility. That I've heard sort of Porges himself say, "Hey, this is a way of organizing some things. This is telling a particular story. This is, science is something that evolves." So I actually sort of picked up a bit of flexibility in his model, but we can see these tensions where there's people who are, polyvagal theory is the end all and be all, and then people saying, "Oh, but this thing doesn't work and this thing doesn't work." So I was going to ask you about that. So I'm glad you brought it up. And anything else you would share about that tension?
Well, I think it can be the case, right, where you have the founding egghead or the founding genius that really is a real scientist, and real scientists know, like, for example, I can't remember his name right now, but he runs the research lab at Harvard. Lichtman is his name. He said, if knowing everything there is to know about the nervous system is a mile, we're at 3 inches. And the greats have that humility, and that's one of the reasons why they keep on getting driven into the literature. And because the literature is constantly changing and evolving, and if you keep on being dynamic in that way, the one of the only responses is humility. You know what I mean? Because it's like it just keeps on changing, and then you're faced with the complexity of life, and at some point, so it's like you almost have to be a mystic then.
Right.
That's why I like embryology, because things get, because more and more that you study embryology, I mean, the nervous system is one thing, but then putting it all together,
the rest of the embryology.
That's a whole nother thing.
Fun, unbelievable.
Yeah, and that was piloerection number 3 of the call from me.
Oh man, so you're going for it.
and so with polyvagal, it's and I'm really glad to hear that about Porges. I think it's really solid research. I want to get trained in the safe and sound model myself. I think it's great neurology, but again, often what happens is you get this brilliant founder, and then the trickle down effect. The grandiosity starts to take root in the followers, who then start to other modalities. And these aren't the folks that are deep in the literature.
Right, exactly. That same othering dynamic.
Yeah, that same othering dynamic.
Right.
And the people, they just kind of take the model, which is an oversimplification. Polyvagal theory is and any model has to be an oversimplification, because otherwise our brains would just break. Yeah. Because 85 billion neurons. Like how do you even like, come on. I like to play with this idea that there's branding in neuroscience just like there's branding everywhere else. And like, scientists, what they do is they dedicate their entire career to just one or two nodes in the network. And of course, Porges's node is the vagus, and it's a radically important node. But for example, the periaqueductal gray, which has been my passion and my love for decades now, is, in my books, of course, and this is how, in my judgment, this is how neuroscience works. Like, you have to get passionate about a structure in the brain, and you can study that for literally 30 years and it'll still keep on opening up. But what it starts to look like is it starts to look almost like religion. It's like, but it's like a neural structure in the brain instead of a deity. Yeah, you know what I mean? And it's like
the almighty Vegas. Yeah, let's bow down.
Yes, the Vegas, and then like Bud Craig, he's the insula guy. You know what I mean? And it's the insula and interoception, and it's all about interoception and safety from an insula standpoint as opposed to a vagus standpoint. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then you have Alan Shore and his the orbitofrontal cortex. It's the orbitofrontal cortex, And,
right. Okay, brain religion. I'm liking this. This is a good framework. Yeah.
So I think a bit of that is happening, right? Which is that you can see that my Jungian thinking is now kind of moving into the neuroscience domain here. And that doesn't mean that these models and maps aren't useful, but let's kind of try to differentiate function from the actual science. Like, for example, the McLean, the triune brain model, is a timelessly useful model. I mean, it's just like I still work with this model with couples, but it's essentially wrong.
Yeah, it's a convenient story that is not very true.
That's the thing, and this goes back to the narrative mind, that we're primarily narrative organisms, and given the enormity of complexity in the brain, I think it is wise to hold it that way. That polyvagal theory is it's a heuristic. It's a useful narrative that has clinical utility. But it is just a tiny...
There's lots of parts of it that probably aren't true.
There's lots of parts of it that aren't true, And like, for example, the periaqueductal gray should very much be in that model for it to be more whole. It's like, if in the Visionary Somatics book, I am deeply ensconced in Panksepp's theory, basic emotions theory, which really centers the periaqueductal gray as the center. Now, of course, I'm bringing thought like what I'm bringing to the book. I'm saying, basically what I just said. Hey, but my style of teaching is let's kind of out myself as I'm doing the thing that I'm doing. And kind of like be critical of the thing that I'm teaching about while I'm teaching it, which has kind of confused students in the past, right? To be critical of the thing that you're teaching.
That you're like, here's my thesis and here's the antithesis at the same time.
It's kind of got me in trouble in the past, but to me that's more.
It's an honest approach. Yeah. Well, it's funny. One example, and I'm gonna butcher the details because I only intermittently review my neurophysiology, but like a few years back, and I wonder if you tracked this, but a few years back, they sort of, you may recall, this was, I think it was around 2020, 2021, and some kind of, neuroscience study came out that said, hey, we took mice and so there's sort of, when we come to the stress model, and HPA axis is kind of a long-standing understanding of the neurohormonal, what mounts the stress response hormonally in a nervous system. And then there was this sort of study where I forget what it was. They cut the connection to the pituitary gland or something like that. And then they saw that the role of osteocalcin, which is a hormone coming from the bones, and that even if they kind of severed the main pathway of the HPA axis, that osteocalcin alone was totally sufficient to raise heart rate and to mount the stress response. And so basically it was like saying this model that everybody thinks of is how it works. If we cut the mechanism, this other mechanism does the exact same thing, which to me was just sort of like this revelation around that, kind of to your point about, we're 3 inches of the way to a mile, that our neuroscientific constructs are super duper useful. We know a lot. We should be proud of that. And we should be pretty aware that even sort of tried and true physiological principles can get modified or adjusted at any time. But so that was just one example that stands out for me.
That's brilliant. Yeah. To really challenge this reductionism that's trying to narrow things into bottom up and top down. It is all in the middle. It's all in the middle. Everything's in the middle, right? And that proves that, kind of like neuropeptides are just not well understood. And they're more ancient. They do a broader range of things. So, you mentioned basically a calcitonin, the calcitonin peptide, which I'm basically in the middle of studying peptides right now and coming up with an integrated, mishmash of, hopefully it's not a mishmash, hopefully it's coherent, but like how, coming from this perspective that we know so little, okay, what are some things that we do know about peptides? Okay. Peptides like oxytocin. Now, peptides, they do basically hormonal things and neurotransmitter things. And what you've just described is, well, hang on. So you're telling me that peptide stuff happens in bones and it does a quote unquote, bottom up stress thing. And what that does is that balances this idea where there can be this obsession regarding top down. Let's snip the top and wait, hang on. Now there's a bottom up. But like
it can go.
But the reason why I'm saying that it's always in the middle is that everything is an integrated whole, right? Like there are integration hubs in the brain. For example, the cerebellum is like the bee's knees to me. Like, to me, the cerebellum is like understanding the cerebellum and cerebellar computation is where it's at in terms of the future of somatic psychotherapy.
Interesting.
To me, like watching a master like Levine in my books with where I'm at in the neuroscience literature is that he's a master of the cerebellum. He's a master of working with the cerebellum clinically. And that is counter to this kind of classical framework of kind of top down versus bottom up. Psychotherapy, and this is one of the grandiose things about a somatic therapist sometimes, is we're the bottom up people.
We're the bottom up guys.
The bottom up people that focus on teaching people how to do top down regulation. But and then the thing is that, like, the structures that are often prioritized, of course, are these ones here, the frontal lobe structures. But more and more, the literature is showing how crucial the cerebellum is, which is a subcortical structure, and has 80% of the volume of the brain. 80% of the volume of the brain is in the cerebellum. Okay. And it is, and so then we have this discourse that is back, front, and front, back. So like, and not only that, of course, we have core to the periphery and periphery to the core. So thinking that nature is working in lines is just wrong-headed, right? I mean, it's just
working as an integrated whole.
It's working as an integrated whole.
Yeah. Super cool. Wow. So loving this. Can we talk about your book? What's the title? What's the theme? When's it being released? What's happening with it?
So it's called Visionary Somatics. I'm under contract with Inner Traditions, and I'm shooting to be done with it by June. I've been at it for about 3.5 years now.
Nice.
So, and really what originally it was going to be kind of like a manual for somatic therapist beginners. But then I started to write it and I was like, this isn't me. Like I need to go complex, because to me, that's what biology and psychology is. It's the study of complexity, and it's learning how to elegantly and usefully dance with complexity. So it's ended up being a complex philosophical and biological work that is trying to do what we're doing. You and I, we're doing this multimodal thing, this interdisciplinary thing. So it is within that tradition. It's very much in an interdisciplinary tradition. I move from concepts like the racialized body and talking about how oppression impacts bodies, to immunology, to embryology, and then into, just full-blown philosophy, and then back into like the neurobiology of trauma. So it's like it's me, right? It's who I am. I'm an interdisciplinary guy. There's weirdly enough, there's still a little part in me that wants to apologize for not being a specialist. You know what I mean? Even though I have to play that game, because we're in, of course, we're in capitalism, right? So I still have to say, oh, I'm a trauma resolution specialist. I still feel like I have to say, and then somehow.
You still have to claim your specializations.
But the thing is that it's like, as Michael Shea used to say, it's like an obstacle course for mystics. The book is like an obstacle course for mystics that are really interested in science and really interested in living on the cutting edge of life.
Cool. Oh, very cool. So if your release date is June-ish, that's so that makes me think that probably at least the main body and bones of the manuscript are there. And are you kind of in an editing phase, or
I'm hammering down the last hardest part, which is the cutting edge science. I've done the hard yards with the philosophy. I've done the hard yards with the science. I'm hammering that down. Then the rest will be easy for me, which is a bit about archetypes and a bit about clinical practice. And then I'll send it into the editors. And I mean, I'm saying that like it's easy, but
well, it sounds like you're closer to the finish line than the entry point.
Oh yeah.
So that's probably good. Yeah. That's cool. Maybe like you, and you've already alluded to this, but I would love to hear you unpacking it. And it probably relates to your book, but if we look at the last 30 years, I sometimes say, my interest was first I got interested in modalities like Rolfing that were kind of rooted in, 1950s, 60s, 70s era frameworks around the human experience. And then I got sort of swept in with the term I use is the neurobiological revolution. I don't know exactly when it started, but maybe around the turn of the millennium or something. It doesn't have a clear beginning. as sort of a big phase and so that's, I really wanted to study that side of things, the trauma resolution models, and how does that fit in to the work that I do. But in terms of kind of like where we're heading, like what's your perspective on the field of maybe somatic psychotherapy, but maybe we could include touch frameworks as well. Where do you see us heading in the next 10, 20, 30 years?
It's a great question. I feel drawn in the direction of the science first, and then maybe we can go from there. One of the linchpins for at the cutting edge of science, let's put it this way, is the astrocyte. Okay. The astrocyte is a glial cell, and it is the kind of the linchpin to a new paradigm called the tripartite synapse model. The tripartite synapse model, which is a fairly new model. And basically what the astrocyte teaches us, astrocytes basically hold the integrity of the blood-brain barrier together.
Okay.
But they're also basically, because they're an immune-sensitive cell, they're the glue between the nervous system and the immune system. Okay. And so, so astrocyte research, and not only that, what's important to note about astrocytes is they're an essential part of the core metabolism of the brain from a molecular perspective. So glutamate and GABA, glutamate's an upper, GABA's a downer or inhibitory, and they're just like pistons, like parasympathetic, sympathetic on a molecular level. Astrocytes are essential, and like the core metabolism of the central nervous system runs on glutamate and GABA. Astrocytes are primary to this this metabolic workhorse in the central nervous system. And what's important about that, of course, is that it's the bridge. The astrocyte is the bridge between the nervous system and the immune system. And so all this talk about the microbiome and immunity and inflammation, there's this huge discourse about inflammation, right? It's just like going like crazy. And at the center of that, from a neurobiological perspective, is the astrocyte, which is and so astrocyte research is like, if I had some money, I'd put it down, and I'd find some astrocyte researchers.
Research. That's where you'd invest.
But functionally, so then the reason why I've gone to science in that regard is, like, how can we let biology teach us about where biology is that sociology and clinical practice needs to go? Because to me, biology is already ahead of us, like way ahead of us. So we need to learn from biology rather than the other way around, trying to teach our biology about how it could be,
how to conform to a sociological model or something. We should be learning from the biology.
Like neural network computing, right? It's supposed to be modeled or inspired off of neural networks, but it is way behind what neural networks actually do. You know what I mean? So, so then from that perspective, like, what can the astrocyte teach us about where we should be going or where we could be going, which is integration. Integration. It's like, I think where we're headed is we're going to be moving out of neurocentric paradigms. Paradigms that and models that are centered just on the nervous system. And models that take us into the complexity of what biology actually is, rather than try to reduce it into models and identities that can be replicated. Models and identities that can be replicated, and then we just end up being in a fractured field. Just like science is a fractured field.
Just looking carefully at a narrow perspective.
So, and I think, and AI is gonna, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly with this stuff. But the good part is that, me personally, I think AI is good at doing interdisciplinary weaving. You know what I mean? It
seeing connections that the human might not see.
Exactly. So I think that the future has something to do, or let's put it this way. I hope that the future has something to do with what we've been talking about throughout this whole episode. And it does carry forward the vision of people like Ida Rolf and then general systems theory, that there's something in biology, there's something in the cosmos that is integrative in ways that our identities and our opinion need to learn from. And so I just hope that we can continue to be more integrative in that way. And to me, that means just kind of walking around going, holy shit, we don't know what's happening. And that's a good thing. And that can make us come alive, with the mystery of life. Right. Yeah. And we can be celebrating life a little bit more.
I'm liking that. So to me, there's this meta theme of, the humility and as opposed to grandiosity. I mean, that when you make the shift into an integrative model and recognize that there's so much more, there's so much that's working intrinsically that our understanding has not even come close, made some great, amazing starts and models. But if we can kind of keep staying humble in the face of the integrated whole, there's much more for us to learn and embody. My paraphrasing of
that's great.
I think I hear
that's
from you.
Great. That way. Why can't biology, what biology does in its enormous integrative complexity, why shouldn't it be our primary teacher?
Our teacher,
and that means that it's not it. We are far from saying, "Oh yeah." I mean, it's ridiculous, right? That I heard a scientist once say that a liver cell is just basically a simple machine. Like, what? Like, no. We're talking just radical elegance and complexity at a molecular scale, and that's magical. It's magical.
Yeah.
So, and it could really be our teacher. We've got it the wrong way around.
Yeah. Very rich. Well, Brian, I just 1,000,000% appreciate this time to hear your thinking and thoughts and explorations. And I just feel a huge resonance with the paradigm that you're bringing forward.
Thanks, Alex. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Very cool. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.